Great. Good afternoon. My name is Nokutula Mene. I work for the UNDP Country Office South Africa as a project management specialist. It is a pleasure to welcome you all today. Please also welcome my co-facilitator, Marion Marigo, capacity building and biodiversity specialist from UNDP in New York. Marion, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning from here in New York and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be connected with you again. It's been a few months since our first workshop, and I really look forward to being with you for the next 3 days.
Thank you, Marion. Before we start, I would like to highlight some key logistics so the consultation can go smoothly today. If you have any technical issues, I request that you send a Zoom message to Leah Phillips or email her at leah.phillips@undp.org. She will help you resolve your issues as quickly as possible. I urge you not to use the group chat. Leah is dropping her email address in the chat just in case you may need it this afternoon. Your microphone will be muted during all the sessions. This will ensure that we are able to hear the speakers clearly. However, should you want to ask a question, you will have two options. You can type your question in the Zoom chat box and we will address them during each question and answer session. Alternatively, you can raise your hand in the control panel and we'll address them during each question and answer session. Note our colleague, Priya, will be updating the question and answer document, which Leah is dropping in the chat at the moment. Finally, we are happy to share that we have a consultation webpage where we will be posting all of the presentation and the recording of our sessions together. You can access this webpage at any time. Leah has dropped the link to the webpage in the chat. I'd like now to invite Leah to give us a short demonstration of the website. Leah, please introduce yourself and give us a short demonstration.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Leah Phillips, and I'm happy to be with you briefly to share with you our Learning for Nature website. I'm just going to stop sharing slides, and let me first drop the link in the chat. So this will be a location where you'll be able to find all of the materials from our project, especially from this second workshop together. And let me share my screen so that way you can see just a little bit better. Okay, here we go. So we have this Learning for Nature page, and it's all about our second consultation. And what it includes is the agenda, some basic information, and then what we're pleased to share with you is some of these important documents that you can find here that you may have received via email or maybe from the last consultation. And then under each of these days, we will be not only adding the presentations, but we will also eventually add the recordings from these sessions. And so as you can see, we already have one of these videos prepared for you to be able to watch, but we will update this later with everything else we can. One other thing to note, and I will also drop this in the chat, is that we have a question and answer document that you will be able to use. It's right here. You'll be able to use, and during the consultation, we will be adding some questions that we hear, as many as that we can, and answers into that document for your reference later. And so you can always use that document, and I will also drop that in the chat. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Note that you do not need to register on the Learning for Nature to access the webpage and all its contents. However, if you're interested in engaging further on the site, we recommend that you do take a moment to create the account. The Learning for Nature site offers a great variety of capacity building opportunities in biodiversity, climate, and sustainable development. I do encourage you to visit and explore. I would also like to let you know that we'll be preparing certificates of participation for all the individuals attending the second round of consultations. We have a diverse group now of over 50 participants.
You can see the Angus is saying 150 registration.
apologies. We have a diverse group of over 50 participants online today, and it is a real pleasure to see you all connected. Please may you rename yourself in the chat so that we know your full name and place of work. To do this, you just click right on your name, look for the option rename, and change it with your first and last name and the name of your organization. I will also do the same, and we'll give each other a few seconds to do that. Thank you, colleagues. We have been working on launching this project and preparing the consultations with colleagues within UNDP and South Africa's Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, DFFE, as well as the South African National Biodiversity Institute, SANBI. As we start the consultations today, we are lucky enough to receive high-level support from high-level speakers in South Africa. Before we get into the agenda of the stakeholder consultation today, I would like to suggest that everyone turn on the video so we can capture a photo of all of us together. Please turn on your cameras. I'm just waiting for a few more colleagues to turn on their cameras. Okay, we are now taking the photo. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much. To officially begin the consultation, I'd like to share the Microsoft with Dr. Ayodele Odusula, the resident representative of the UNDP country office in South Africa. Welcome, Dr. Odusula.
Yeah. Thank you, the two program coordinators, Nokutula and Mariam. And I just want to use this opportunity to say good afternoon to my dear brother, the CEO of SANBI, Mr. Shonesani Muhedisi. It is really a privilege for us to have you, and also the Director General of the Department of Forestry, Fishery and Environment, represented by my dear sister, the DDG Biodiversity Conservation, my dear sister Flora Mokoloa. Let me use this opportunity also to really congratulate you on this new appointment, and I'm sure it's going to provide opportunity for us to work further together in achieving the mandate of the department. Dear colleagues, distinguished participants, it's really a pleasure to be with you today and to welcome you to this very important consultation, Mapping Nature for People and the Planet in South Africa. Well, one thing that I just want to really re-echo is the impact of COVID-19 across the world. It is a development that has really changed the way we think, the way we behave, and the way we do business. And the implications on the continent is really huge, with a dip in the gross domestic product by 3.4% in 2010-20, and also countries that depend heavily on tourism had serious setback in 2020, with a decline in GDP ranging between 10 and 16%. Countries like Cabo Verde and Mauritius are in this respect. And in our dear country too, GDP dipped by about 7.9%. And it really shows that for us to really go back to pre-COVID era, it will take about 5 years based on the socioeconomic impact assessment undertaken by UNDP last year. So it's really something that we all need to really see. How do we manage the issue of nature for the people and the planet in the context of post-COVID era? So it's really something that we need to really leverage very well. COVID-19 has taught us a lot of things we need to reinvent for us to really ensure that we bounce back better and greener. And I see this as an opportune moment for us to really see how can we manage our natural assets and resources to promote prosperous people and quality planet. So that's one thing which I think is really very important for us to focus attention on in this discussion. But I just want to let you know that UNDP is very, very serious about the issue relating to nature as a critical component of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Biodiversity conservation goal is something that UNDP plays in a very strategic position, as has been articulated in the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Biodiversity conservation and improvement of the biodiversity economy form an integral part of what we have developed in our program document 2020 to 2025. And we strongly believe that if we manage it very well, it's going to really accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and also achieving the triple development challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment in the country. This is very important given the fact that South Africa is one of the most biodiverse countries globally due to species diversities, rate of endemism, and diverse ecosystem. It is a home to flora and fauna that are unique to South Africa, and some of them you cannot even find in any part of the world. So if you look at the assets South Africa has in terms of biodiversity, it's quite huge. We're talking about terrestrial biodiversity comprising about 9 different biomes. And if you look at the river ecoregions, we have about 31 river ecoregions in South Africa. And if you look at the coastal marine habitats, we're talking about 3 biogeographical zones in South Africa. And also, if you go deep into the asset of natural resources that South Africa has, it accounts for about 10% of the world plant species and also 7% of reptiles, birds, and mammals. And don't forget, South Africa is the only confluent country in the world, particularly with respect to Atlantic Ocean as well as Indian Ocean, the meeting point. This is where you have the meeting point of the 2 oceans anywhere in the world. So it's something that I think we need to leverage for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at a number of the rich ecosystems that we have, they definitely help to sustain human life and well-being by providing South Africans with a lot of livelihood, survival, including water, food, disaster reduction, job opportunities, and so many others that our livelihood and sustenance depend on. So the various ecosystem goods and services provided by nature are very important for the subsistence of the economic and human survival. So in this regard, the role of biodiversity cannot be overstretched, especially as the world looks to build back better and greener. Distinguished colleagues and participants, SDG clearly emphasizes the importance of nature to humanity and economy. More than half of the SDG depend directly on nature, and biodiversity loss was repeatedly mentioned as part of the critical issues in 2020 and 2021 as something that we have to really deal with. And also, the COP26 that has just been completed in Glasgow also anchor this as something that we all have to watch out for. For instance, the National Red List assessment shows that South Africa's biodiversity is seriously endangered. 10% of the birds and frogs, 20% of mammals, 13% of plants, and 44% of main river ecosystem are seriously endangered. So several factors account for biodiversity loss, among which are habitat loss, changes in freshwater flow, overuse of some species, pollution, climate change, and invasive alien species all contribute to loss of biodiversity. And we shouldn't forget, some of the agricultural practices too contribute to this. The continued loss of biodiversity threatens the achievement of curbing climate change, eradicating poverty, and decreasing unemployment in the country. In this regard, a key priority for UNDP is to continue to support South African government as well as various partners in the country in the implementation of the SDGs and other policies that aim to preserve the natural ecosystem and also support human well-being and livelihood. We in UNDP, South Africa Country Office we have committed to a number of initiatives which have been articulated in our program document, particularly focusing on implementing and scaling up solutions for enhancing sustainable management of natural resources. We are working in South Africa together with partners to, one, implement the biodiversity finance initiatives, which Nokutula is helping us, is heading under the coordination of Janice. Community-based JEV small grant program to advance wildlife economic, which Anele Moyo is helping us to really handle here. The sustainable land management endeavor, which is applied in degraded but productive South African landscapes, also being coordinated by Lehman here with us. And an integrated river boundary water management within the context of the neighboring countries in Southern African country, the Limpopo Basin, as well as the Orange Seku Basin, which again, we are managing with Limcom as well as Orasecom. Through the foregoing project, we are helping to develop a sustainable relationship with nature. And we strongly believe that this is really very important for us to really accelerate progress and development on national development priorities. During the last consultation, you worked together to identify the country's top 10 goals related to nature, climate, and sustainable development. This included targets related to rehabilitating ecosystems that maintain water quality, related to adapting to climate change, and also promoting biodiversity contribution to the economy. Through this project, Mapping Nature for People and Planet in South Africa, we hope to support the government of South Africa across all departments to support integrated land management policies that protect nature while strengthening local economies. A similar project has been implemented in countries like Uganda and Costa Rica, where they have been a major part of accelerating development in these two countries. Also here in South Africa, through the small grant project, our partnership with Elephant Alive that support the black mambas to protect our elephants, the partnership with SAMPAC, including the Kruger National Park, to reduce human-elephant conflict through the Shelley Bomb Project, the beehive farming projects, and the planting of non-palatable plants are geared towards linking nature to people and the planet. UNDP continues to value the partnership of this project, and we would like to really acknowledge the participation of our esteemed partners, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and also SAMBI, who have been our strategic partners on this work. To all participants, I just want to really encourage you to contribute your unique expertise and institutional knowledge to meaningfully engage in creating a map that helps us to inform biodiversity regeneration, conservation, and preservation in South Africa. So I just call you to try as much as possible to leverage this opportunity to harness the pragmatic way of using nature to promote people's prosperity and quality planet. So I thank you for your attention and wishing you all the best. So I therefore welcome you to this particular consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Otisola. We would like to also take this opportunity to thank you for your continued support throughout the implementation of this project. Thank you. It is also my great pleasure to welcome and to give the floor to Ms. Flora Mukuhlwa, Deputy Director, Biodiversity and Conservation in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate Flora on her appointment as the DDG. Ms. Mukuhlwa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nokuthula, and good afternoon, colleagues. Dr. Ayo, a pleasure to be with you in the room, and thank you for your kind words. I'm really honored. Mr. Shoni Munjetsi, if he's in the room, the CEO of SANBI, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, colleagues and guests that are attending this consultation workshop. As you may be aware, some of you, in South Africa, our constitution in terms of section 24 is very clear in terms of the right to an environment that is safe and healthy for all the citizens of this republic. What this section of the constitution further does is to oblige government through legislative and other means to ensure that that right is then advanced. We have a number of policies in South African legislation that are advancing that particular right. In the previous workshop, I have shared with you the National Development Plan, which is basically the guiding mechanism in terms of the development trajectory of the republic, and also to the extent that it has implications for biodiversity and conservation in this country. You would have heard, even in the last 2 weeks from Glasgow and elsewhere, South Africa aims to advance what is called a just transition. Why we're calling for a just transition is due to our painful historical past, as you may be aware, to the extent that resource allocation, resource use, resource management has been imbalanced in the country before. And therefore, in that perspective, within the biodiversity and conservation sector, we are bringing together or into practice all the role players that are concerned, that have interest, that are affected in the management of our precious biodiversity resources. As you would have heard, that we are a mega diverse country. And therefore, part of the work that we are doing is in this financial year, and our financial year ends by end of March next year, we're hoping that Cabinet will approve the National Biodiversity Framework. And essentially, the National Biodiversity Framework will be our guiding document in terms of how we integrate, how we align, how we protect our natural resources, and how we bring together all the role players in ensuring that in protecting, conserving, and sustainably using our natural resources, that we are able to ensure that we do not compromise our limited, finite biodiversity resources in the country. Also to say that that particular National Biodiversity Framework therefore consists a list of all the policies and the legislation that is in place. It also contains what we call a community of practice, in the sense that it starts to indicate even other areas outside of the Department of Forestry and Fisheries and Environment is responsible for, and highlight best practices in relation to conservation and biodiversity management. And that community of practice, therefore, is quite useful, especially for this particular project on the Essential Life Supporting Areas project, in the sense that it starts to direct us specifically into where else are we supposed to be taking our efforts in relation to biodiversity and conservation management. The other thing that we are doing also is around the whole issue of resource mobilization. And I would like to really thank the UNDP country office that is working with us through the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, which is a global project, in implementing some of the finance solutions that we've identified as priority for the country. The one thing that the Biodiversity Finance Initiative has done has really been to spare a broader program around resource mobilization in the country, to the extent that as an outcome to a task team that was appointed by the Minister on resource mobilization to respond to the impacts of COVID-19, we have now developed what is called a resource mobilization action plan. And essentially that action plan starts to cover areas in which at an institutional governance level, we need to have enabling mechanism that will allow us and position us to attract those resources. We also identified areas where we will require what we call environmental fiscal measures. In a week or two, we'll be meeting with National Treasury to discuss that particular aspect. We also identify areas where we need to implement specific projects around sustainable use from a consumptive, non-consumptive basis. Non-consumptive, largely through our commercialization strategies that we have around protected areas. In consumptive uses, as you know, we do have a biodiversity strategy in the country that is in implementation. And I think importantly for this particular work we are doing around ELSA is the fact that we have also identified collaborative partnerships. What we will be doing is to ensure that we try to integrate the learning that we're getting out of the donor and collaborative programs that we are having in place, and it's starting to integrate those with most of the work that we are doing in the department as we have been doing in the past. Therefore, ELSA fits into very nicely into the work that we are doing in the department and within the sector. We are very much looking forward to collaborating on this project going forward. It's going to provide us with the much needed information we require in relation to where our efforts need to be directed in relation to how we improve basically what I will call managing biodiversity and conservation resources from a spatial perspective, and therefore also provides us with an indication of where we need to be directing resources, whether it's in terms of capacity resources or financial resources that may be required into those areas, as we know that the question of ecosystem health is quite important in the country. And therefore, we welcome this particular project and we make this commitment to operate further in its implementation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Flora Mkufa. We're thrilled to have the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment supporting this project. We thank you in advance for sharing your knowledge and your guidance around the power of spatial data. I would now like to share the microphone with Mr. Shonisani Munjedzi, CEO of SANBI. We'd like to thank you for your support for the project. You now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nokuthula, and a warm greetings to Dr. Adusola, the UNDP regional representative, and also Ms. Flora Mkufa from DFFE, which is the department responsible for environment, forestry, and fisheries in the Republic of South Africa, fellow experts, colleagues, and also key stakeholders that are present here. We greet you from South Africa. It's quite warm, as it was said earlier on when we started. And we really appreciate this second round of consultations for this project on mapping nature for people and planet, the pilot project to identify essential life support areas, which I will refer to ELSAs. in South Africa and also participating partners. We have noted with appreciation that this project, the ELSA project, aims to assist countries in developing frameworks for identifying special priority areas linked to country-level policies in order to protect them, manage them, and also restore biodiversity within the context of national development needs of any of the participating countries, like South Africa as we are. South Africa is a mega diverse country with high level of endemism. I think it was said earlier on by Dr. Ayo that South Africa occupies a unique space globally in terms of the importance of our biodiversity. We also face pressing developmental challenges, as you referred to, as the triple challenges of unemployment, poverty, and also inequality, all of which have been intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic. So as SANBI, we firmly believe that South Africa's wealth of biodiversity assets and ecological infrastructure are integral in addressing these triple challenges as referred to, all those socioeconomic challenges that I spoke about. We are therefore fortunate to have a long history of biodiversity science, and in particular systematic biodiversity planning. But in this context, as it's referred to in the ELSAs, we refer to this as systematic conservation planning, which we have used to identify and map critical biodiversity areas, map ecological infrastructure that is essential for ecological sustainability of our landscapes and seascapes. We have used these maps to inform policies and decisions about land use and environmental management in a range of production sectors, as well as to inform catchment management and natural resource management. This has required thorough spatial planning based on the best available science, combined with in-depth understanding of the policy and the institutional context, in order to bridge the divide that frequently exists between science, policy, and implementation. Our experience has shown that maps can be powerful, or can be a powerful tool for making the case that biodiversity assets and ecological infrastructure are an integral part of the healthy, productive landscapes and seascapes that support people and the economy. I checked and looked at the assessment that was facilitated by the UNDP in 2018, which was also referred to in the discussions within the CBD context, also indicating how conservation, sustainable policies can be informed appropriately. But there were challenges that were identified, or shortcomings. And so such shortcomings include data inaccessibility, issues around data usability, data that is not nationally validated, and also issues around capacity. So this project is responding to all of those issues in a more coherent and strategic manner, and that's what we are looking forward to, hence our participation with the partners that are involved. So a critical success factor has been the development of a strong community of practice of spatial biodiversity planners that engages regularly with other sectors. In actual fact, here in South Africa, we on an annual basis host what we call biodiversity planning forum, which brings together all experts and anyone else and practitioners involved in planning at the local, at the provincial, at the national government level, to share experiences and find new ways of interfacing and interacting with data to inform policy and planning, and also to work towards optimal development futures of our land and of our oceans here in the country, as it has been said earlier on. South Africa has also developed coherent links from the level of our commitments in the UNCBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. We do that through our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, through our National Biodiversity Framework, which is our short-term 5-year plan to that effect, our sectoral commitments, through our legislative pronouncement and prescriptions that we see in the National Biodiversity Act with its regulations, and also through our partnerships and working together with our provincial and also local partners to achieving the goals that are consistent with biodiversity protection and also the objectives thereof. Our medium-term strategic framework also highlights the importance of planning and biodiversity and incorporation of biodiversity spatial layers in all aspects of planning and management. So the emerging post-2020 global biodiversity framework that is being negotiated at the moment has a target that is very specific, target 1, that in fact deals specifically with spatial planning and the need to include biodiversity and ecosystem priorities in integrated multi-sectoral spatial plans. So this reinforces the importance of our national efforts in this regard, hence the importance and the significance of this initiative that we're involved in now. South Africa's experience then gives partners, UNDP and others, and other partners that are involved in, with an opportunity to explore the potential of the ESLA or ESLA approach to mapping nature for people and planet in a data and expert-rich environment, and to pilot the development of outputs using national data sets under the guidance of national experts. We, in turn, were keen to engage in this process and are still keen to engage in this process as it offers us a chance to reflect, to learn, and also to improve our practice so that we may better protect and manage biodiversity in service of our people and the world at large. Thus far, the ESLA project has provided a platform for South African stakeholders and experts to assess our spatial data and integrate them for a specific purpose, the spatial representation of 10 priority policy targets that have been articulated as selected by the stakeholder group, even in the previous engagement that we had. The policy targets identified as priorities are varied. They include maintaining and rehabilitating ecosystems that make a strategic contribution to water security. They also include restoring degraded ecological infrastructure, expanding the conservation estate. They also include protecting and preserving carbon stocks in ecosystems, and also creating jobs in the wildlife economy and others. As you can see, they are wide ranged in the manner that they are framed and also in the manner that they are articulated. The novel approach used in the ESLA project will deliver policy-linked spatial outputs that can assist us in focusing our efforts in the appropriate areas of the country in order to achieve our goals across a range of nature-based policy targets. As we all, as well as to monitor the progress towards achieving these goals. As you can see, all those aspects that I've articulated, they cut across the 3 Rio conventions appropriately: the UNCCD, UNCBD, and UNFCCC, and also go further to dealing with aspects of attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to thank the many and diverse range of experts who availed their time and expertise during the stakeholder consultation process that we undertook in June, and the intensive data collection and preparation phase in July. So we are hard at work in this regard, not only in July, also in August and also in September. We were hard at work, which you will see later on as colleagues and experts will be sharing the work done thus far. So this engagement assisted this process, and also the UNDP team to identify and attain the best available spatial data sets, and us as a country as well, as we improve our treatment and our use of spatial data and spatial information in decision making. And also this process provided us with insights or further insights into the accuracy and sustainability of the use of these data sets through or interfacing with the ESLA map as presented. The ESLA process has necessitated that we look at our spatial data through a policy priority lens, and in doing so has helped us to identify gaps in spatial mapping, and where improvements could be made, we have identified those and will adjust accordingly. It has also highlighted how important it is for policymakers to properly unpack their policy targets as and when they are developed, and to improve targets definitions, to remove ambiguity, to use standardized terminology, and also to ensure that targets can be effectively and efficiently calculated and monitored. That is at the heart of this process. So we are excited to be part of this process that not only influence policy decision-making at the national level, even at the provincial level in our country, it even goes down to the local level. And we are fortunate that the country has developed what we call a district development model in its approach. And this spatial data, spatial information, and the outcomes of this process will assist a lot even in that regard. And we thank you, and we wish you and the teams, as we continue to participate in the process, the best that should be regarded as the outcomes of this wonderful and strategic initiative. We thank you from Zambia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mjezi. We are very grateful that you are able to join us today and thrilled to be working closely with Zambia to implement this project. We thank you for your continued support. I will now turn over to Marion to facilitate the rest of the session. Marion, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nkutila, and thank you again to all of our high-level speakers. And thanks again and welcome to all of the new participants that joined us in the meantime. Before we dive into the objective and more presentations today, we will take just a few minutes to watch this video that was produced by the team in South Africa and was showed during the Nature for Life Hub in October 2020. Leah, if you can play this one.
South Africa is an extremely biodiversity-rich country, sporting high levels of endemism, making South Africa a preferred destination for nature-based tourism. South Africa's biodiversity serves as an important foundation for economic growth and sustainable development. The protection and enhancement of environmental assets and natural resources are high on the South African agenda. In stark contrast, however, the triple challenge of poverty, unemployment, and inequality are still prominent socio-economic challenges that are faced by the majority of South Africans. The United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, together with its key partners, has been leading work to harness the positive opportunities provided by biodiversity and natural ecosystems as a catalyst for sustainable development and economic growth.
I am Ayodele Odushola, the resident representative of the United Nations Development Programme South Africa Country Office. The UNDP remains committed to supporting the government and people of South Africa to achieve their national and international development goals, as well as outlined in the National Development Plan and the Medium-Term Strategic Framework. In 2021, we plan to ramp up the global ambition for nature, climate, and energy with the high-level dialogues on energy, the Biodiversity Conference of Parties, and the Climate Change Conference of Parties 26.
The South African National Development Plan, Vision 2030, confirms that national economic growth is dependent on the environmental sustainability of our proposed development path. A growing economy needs secure water sources. South Africa's 22 strategic water source areas cover 10% of the country, but experience over 50% of the country's rainfall. These areas, together with the river systems that deliver water to the economic centers of the country, must be effectively managed and secured to continue and enhance water quantity and quality. Biodiversity must play a role in building South Africa's economy. Sustainable resource use through the wildlife and bioprospecting sectors are being explored through the delineation of and investment into biodiversity economic nodes.
Good day, I'm Deshni Pillay, the Chief Director of Biodiversity Information and Policy Advice at the South African National Biodiversity Institute. In partnership with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment and provincial conservation agencies, we have developed high-quality, reliable spatial data on nature for decision makers. These maps of critical biodiversity areas and ecological infrastructure are helping stakeholders to manage land, rivers, and catchments for sustainable development.
South Africa is one of the global leaders in using spatial mapping to inform land use decision-making across sectors. The ELSA project, which has just been initiated in South Africa, presents an opportunity for the country to use their spatial datasets in order to represent the country's top spatial priority targets. Mapping synergies and conflicts across the different policy priority targets will be important points of departure from which strategic decisions and trade-offs need to be made. Using the spatial data that we are collecting for ELSA, we can further visualize priority ecological infrastructure as well as areas important for ecosystem-based adaptation and for stimulating the biodiversity economy.
Awareness, understanding, and addressing our impacts and dependencies on nature are some of the challenges experienced across all sectors of the South African society. South Africa, however, is one of the mega diverse countries in the world. We love and enjoy nature, use it and trade it, but we don't really understand nature's real value, nor how it is central to development, or that investment in biodiversity should be considered as development and growth.
Armed with our map of hope, we can now collectively make better decisions about how to protect our ecological infrastructure and sustainably manage nature for a thriving biodiversity economy, which are the backbone of the region's economic development opportunities.
Thanks, Leah, for playing the video, and congratulations to UNDP South Africa, to DFFE and SENBI for making such a great video, and overall for implementing such an important project. All right, to keep us on time, I'm going to move forward and we'll begin by providing an overview of the sessions that we're going to have in the next few weeks together. Leah, if I can ask you to drop maybe the agenda in the chat so we have all the latest version, you will see that our consultation will be hosted today and in the next 2 days. Day 1 is an introduction and a welcome back to all of our participants after 18 months without contact. We will recap what we did during this time and provide a bit more context from the science side. As you may remember, this whole project is about systematic conservation planning, so we'll go back on that. And then day 2 and day 3 really is very participatory moment. So tomorrow and Wednesday, we'll co-create together the ELSA map through a series of participative activities. During this session, we will actually really rely on your expertise and knowledge and active participation. And I'm very pleased to see today that we have more than 50 participants with us. So thank you very much for that. Today, we do have 3 main objectives for our first session. So the first one, as you understand, is to refresh your memory about the project vision in South Africa and explain what was done in the past few months since our first consultation. The second objective is to go a little bit deeper into the science behind ELSA, the systematic conservation planning science, and explain some of the key concepts that will be important for our sessions together today. And we're hoping to have a little bit of time for Q&A. And the third session, the third and last objective, sorry, is to review a few key elements of the ELSA analysis for South Africa, setting the basis for the next few days. The analysis has been developed on South Africa's unique context and reflect to your national priorities and the data that you have available in the country. And that follows also extensive technical meetings, I understand, that happened in the past few months, and thanks to the national experts for that. So today we will ask for not necessarily your feedback, but we really want to present you what we did in the past few weeks together with you and make sure we're all on the same page, and then be ready for tomorrow. So you can see on the screen the detailed agenda for today. We'll start with a brief presentation let me take this. We'll start with a brief presentation of our colleague Nokutula and Genevieve Pence on the progress since the first stakeholder consultation. And then we'll have a presentation from Annie Vernig on UN Biodiversity Lab, as well as a brief video from James Watson on introducing SCP. And then Oscar Venter, who's the lead scientist in this project, will send us a little video to explain how SCP is applying to the ELSA project in South Africa. And we'll conclude the session with a last presentation from Oscar and Jen on the ELSA zones for protection, avoidance, mitigation, rehabilitation, and urban adaptation. So with this, I do not want to take more time. As you know, the project started earlier this year in 2021. We had our first consultation in June 2021. And since then, we did achieve a lot. And to summarize the progress to date and introduce again, remind you the vision of this project moving forward, I will give the floor back to my colleague Nokutula, who is a biofilm project management specialist at UNDP, together with Genevieve Pence, who is a special data consultant with us at UNDP. We'll have time for question and answer. And so thank you, Nokutula and Jen, for preparing this presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Marianne. Good afternoon again, colleagues. My task here is simple, just to remind us of the journey we've walked thus far through the Mapping Nature for People and Planet South Africa project. For those who are just joining us, my name is Nokutula Mini. As our key speakers have indicated, we are facing a drastic incremental loss of the world's capital, on which more than 3 billion people depend. Governments have committed to putting in place actions that halt the loss of natural capital, and we believe that this project can help to inform such actions using spatial data as a tool. It was through a recognition that national level data on biodiversity is often inaccessible and siloed that various partners have come together and participated in this project to create an ELSA map for South Africa. The principal goal of this project is to map essential life support areas in South Africa, ELSAs, using spatial data which is aligned to national policy targets. Through this process, we aim to support the country in its use of spatial data to pursue the achievement of the 3 Rio Conventions and the nature-dependent SDGs. Next slide, please. On this slide, you will see 4 critical steps of the ELSA project. The project works to identify key national policy and policy targets. It then goes through a process of identifying and curating relevant data sets by working closely with the project team in pilot countries to build a baseline of biodiversity and sustainable development data using existing national level data sets to help map essential life support areas. Our journey in South Africa with the ELSA project began in March 2021. Next slide, please. We, together with our partners, have committed to a process of generating a national vision for the project using key policy priorities and data, identifying opportunities by locating important areas for nature, climate, and sustainable development, followed by a review process with national experts. We have also committed to then creating ELSA maps, which is what we will be doing over the next few days. And finally, mainstreaming results through concrete policy recommendations, ideally with project partners taking action and monitoring the results. we held the first stakeholder workshop from the 9th to the 15th of June 2021. At this initial consultation, we sought to introduce the vision of the ELSA project in South Africa. We sought to identify and prioritize areas where policies can take nature-based actions to address a range of national priorities for conservation and sustainable development. We sought to develop methods to achieve this vision with cutting-edge and rigorous science, identify key national geospatial data, and assess the policy context, identifying key stakeholders and defining a roadmap to meet the 3 Rio Conventions and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. A report detailing the first phase of the consultation is available on the Learning for Nature website. Our colleagues will also be able to place a link in the chat box for ease of reference. Next slide. These are some of the happy faces who attended the first stakeholder consultation. The first stakeholder consultation was held over 4 days and attended by over 80 participants from 6 different countries. Next slide, please. We had the privilege of listening to the presentations from 6 national and 7 international presenters. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who was part of this process. As a result of the process, 10 mappable targets were identified. We also became the first country to identify a key priority on the wildlife economy that was initially considered unmappable. Through this process of consultation, we have reviewed the national level data on agriculture, carbon, protected areas, critical biodiversity areas, ecosystem, ecological infrastructure for water, strategic water source areas, land cover, wildlife and plant species, and degradation to determine which could be the most appropriate to include in the final ELSA map. At the first consultation, we also reviewed methods that would be used to create a South African ELSA map and received commitments from the various stakeholders to participate in this process. As part of this first consultation, next slide, we jointly identified 10 mappable policy targets. These are outlined on the slide that you see on your screen and range from water rehabilitation, expansion of the conservation estate, and land degradation neutrality, to mention a few. I will not go into detail around these targets. We will have an opportunity to engage with these targets as we proceed over the next few days. At this juncture, I would like to hand over to our colleague, Genevieve Pence, who has been a consultant on the project and played a critical role since the first consultation. Over to you, Jen.
Great. Thanks, Nokutula. So throughout July, August, and September, we held expert consultations with each week focusing on a different policy commitment or a different policy target. For the policy of interest for that week, we first gathered data, following up on the recommendations from that data hackathon that we held in June, and we determined which data sets could or couldn't be used going forward. From those investigations, and also cross-checking that data with the original policy document and the intent of that original policy, we established points of departure and suggested ways, or a suggested way forward. This was then all discussed in an expert meeting, as well as lots of follow-up communication so that we could land on the best data and the best approach for representing each of our policy commitments spatially. During this data collection phase, we engaged with over 58 topic experts and data providers, and this culminated in the uploading of 44 data layers to incorporate directly into the ELSA tool and the ELSA map development. After data handover, the in-country team and the global team worked together on pre-processing all of these inputs and the map parameters. Next slide, please. I'd like to give a huge thank you to everyone involved in these very productive sessions that we held over the 3 months. You can see them listed here. In addition to 1 meeting per priority policy, we also held a few additional exploratory or cross-cutting meetings. So for example, we looked a bit deeper into bioprospecting priorities. We looked at agricultural priorities and it's just species in general, sorry, as cross-cutting themes. Next slide. Also, huge thank you to all of the data providers coming from across national and provincial government departments, parastatals, and NGOs. And just to let everyone know that all of the data used has been documented extensively in terms of noting the original source and the metadata. Next slide, please. So a little bit later, I'll be going through these top 10 priorities and just showing a graphic of what each one actually looks like. But first, I wanted to show you this slide, which represents the full suite of our selected policy priorities. Those are listed in the center column under the top 10. To the left of that, you can see the policy document that they originate from. And in the far right-hand column, you'll see a summary of the data that was used to spatially represent that policy commitment. Many of the data sources will be familiar to you. For example, from the National Biodiversity Assessment, our river and wetland data sets, strategic water source areas, protected areas, critical biodiversity areas. But I would also like to highlight a few of the new data derivations and new data composites that came about through our data collection phase. Next slide, please. So just highlighting a few of the data sets that you will not have seen before, we now have a wildlife sector expansion heat map. We took a look at protected area expansion through a lens that's a bit different to what we look at in our national protected area expansion strategy. We have a map that highlights areas that are important for underprotected plant and animal species habitat protection. We have a proxy for our land degradation map and our land degradation neutrality. And we have a look at how you might do a macro scaling of action zoning across the entire country in terms of where the priorities may be for protection, for avoiding, mitigating, and rehabilitating. Some of the gaps that are highlighted were our national freshwater ecosystem priorities needing to be updated, needing an update of invasive alien plant inventory. We need to tackle the issue of how we map and spatially represent at a national scale carbon depletion and degradation. Obviously, there's lots of room for improvement in how we map degradation in both our land and water environments. The last gap, the reconciliation of overlapping sector priorities, is perhaps not so much a gap as the opportunity that ELSA provides us with. That is to say that ELSA provides an opportunity to gain insight into what nature-based solutions should be prioritized where in order to achieve our global sustainability commitments. By necessity, however, this is an iterative process. The first ELSA outputs that we generate tomorrow and Wednesday, very exciting, will give us a starting point to discuss and to see at a national spatial scale where certain land uses may be especially maladaptive in light of our sustainability goals, what trade-offs we might need to consider between competing land uses, and importantly, where there are synergies between priorities for nature and for people. Next slide. After this joint creation and review of South Africa's first ELSA map tomorrow and Wednesday, there will be a follow-up validation meeting, and thereafter our map of hope will be available on the UN Biodiversity Lab, as well as brought in country along with the ELSA web tool for us to take further forward. Back to you, Nokutula. And next slide, I think, Leah.
That's correct. Thank you, Jen. This project is a significant project, and we hope that it can support the South African government to be able to implement in its implementation of the SDGs and other policies. We are hopeful that the ELSA map can support the government of South Africa and the conservation planning community here in South Africa to further the management of essential life support areas. Please note that this joint ELSA map produced through this project is not a UNDP ELSA map. Instead, it belongs to all of you to use as you wish to advance the biodiversity agenda. With this, I hope we have taken you through a journey, a catch-up journey of where we are. And Marianne, back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nukutula, and thanks also to Jen for this great presentation. More generally, thank you and congrats to everyone who moved this project forward in the past few months. It's incredible to see all of the meetings that you have. Bernig, Strategic Advisor on Spatial Planning for UNDP, and also Coordinator of the Science for this ELSA project. So she'll provide a brief recap on the UN Biodiversity Lab platform and show you the workspace that we're in process of creating for South Africa, making a direct link, I think, with what Jen just said. Annie, welcome and good morning from the west coast of the US, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Marion. As you can see, still a little bit dark here, but great to be here with all of you. My connection was going off a little bit, so I think I'm going to turn off my video just to make sure there's no problem with audio, and I will jump in. So with this presentation, we're moving into the second part of today's session, which will explore the science elements behind the ELSA analysis. So Jen's presentation was a great transition, and in this presentation, I'll build on that to introduce two web-based tools we'll make available through the project, the UN Biodiversity Lab and our ELSA web tool. So for those of you who attended the first stakeholder consultation, I gave a brief overview of UNBL there. So I'll start out there just to give a brief recap and get everyone up to speed. So simple question, what is UNBL? We created the UN Biodiversity Lab just over 3 years ago, specifically to support parties in their commitments to the Convention on Biological Diversity. UN Biodiversity Lab is a free open source platform that provides access to global spatial data layers and analytic tools, and it doesn't require any GIS expertise to use. Next slide. Over the past 3 years, we've built a community of practice around UNBL, including over 300 policymakers from 61 countries. And we're interested to build on this foundation to use UNBL to support the Mapping Nature for People and Planet project in South Africa. Next slide. So today, instead of going into the details of UNBL, I'd like to focus particularly on features that can support the ELSA process and introduce our ELSA web tool. On this slide, you're seeing 5 key features that we offer through UNBL, as well as the ELSA web tool. Our goal is that in the future, we'll merge these two platforms into a single interface, but for now, they're separate. So with the remainder of this presentation, I'd like to talk through what functionalities are offered on each and make sure that this is clear for all of you going forward. And in particular, I'll focus in on what are numbers 2, 3, and 4 on this slide, as they're particularly important for this project. Next slide. So you can see all 3 on this slide again, and for the remainder of this presentation, I'll go through these. First, we'll talk about using UNBL to access project data. Second, about using the ELSA web tool to actually run and iterate the analysis. And third, I'll show you how you can access dynamic metrics for South Africa through UN Biodiversity Lab. Next slide. All right, so the first feature I'd like to highlight is that through UN Biodiversity Lab, we're happy to provide South Africa with a secure workspace where you can easily access all of the data layers that we've collected through this project for use in the ELSA South Africa analysis. So everything that Jen was starting to show in her previous presentation will have available through UNBL. This workspace will also eventually have the final ELSA maps, as Jen mentioned. In addition to this, you'll be able to upload other national spatial data layers into this workspace, so you have everything in a central repository. We'll make the workspace fully available to all of those of you who are attending today and turn over ownership to our core South African national team. I want to emphasize here that we don't intend this to replace any existing national monitoring systems or platforms that you already have available. We just want to offer this as a resource so it's very easy to access the data that we've created through this project and for you to use as you see fit going forward. Next slide. Here you can see an example of the private workspace we created for Haiti. On the left-hand side are some of the national data layers we collected through the project, and on the right, you're just seeing a couple of them visualized. We'll create something very similar for South Africa in the weeks following this consultation. Next slide. All right, second, the ability to run the ELSA analysis. This is available through our ELSA web tool, which enables you to modify the parameters for the ELSA analysis, to actually run the analysis, and to download the results. Oscar will talk through this in much more detail in our upcoming sessions, so for now, I will leave this there. Next slide. Here you can just see a screenshot of the ELSA web tool for Haiti, and you'll be seeing something very similar for South Africa in our upcoming sessions. Next slide. All right, finally, I'd like to highlight a third characteristic that we offer through UN Biodiversity Lab, and this is the ability to calculate dynamic metrics for your country for any area of interest within the country. You can see all of the metrics on this slide, and all of these are ways that you can monitor the effectiveness of biodiversity interventions in your country. I won't go through all of these today, but like I did in the first stakeholder consultation, I'll just highlight the protected areas metric. Next slide. So you can see this here. On the left, you can see a graphical interface with summary reporting right now at the whole country level. And on the right, you can see a map of protected areas in South Africa, pulling from the World Database on Protected Areas. Next slide. Great. So with this presentation, I've attempted to provide a little bit of an overview of UN Biodiversity Lab, our ELSA web tool, and show how they offer different functionalities that can come together to support you during and after the ELSA project to first collect all national data within a central repository on UN Biodiversity Lab. Second, to run the analysis on the ELSA web tool. And third, to monitor the effectiveness of biodiversity interventions using dynamic metrics on UNBL. I'm very happy to take any questions about the differences between these two platforms or how you can use them going forward, and look forward to continuing these conversations. So with that, I will say thank you very much and hand it back over to Marion.
Thank you, Annie. Thanks so much. And we didn't have any issue with your sound, so that's perfect. We are fairly behind schedule, and so I would suggest that if you do have questions, drop them in the chat. Annie's going to stay with us, I think, for a few more moments, and should be able to address your questions via the chat. If there is one big question that requires that we respond out loud, we'll do that. But Annie, if you're okay with this option, then we'll be a little bit more respectful of the time of our participants. So please drop your question in the chat. Annie is here to answer them. And Annie, you can also drop your email address, I think, in the chat in case there is some more technical questions that require more than a chat. In the meantime, we can move on with our program, and we would like to re-show you a short recording from our Australian colleague, Dr. James Watson, who is Professor of Conservation Science at University of Queensland, to give a brief introduction on systematic conservation planning. Again, we're resetting the bases in this workshop. Leah, if I can ask you please to play this video, that would be fantastic.
G'day, my name's James Watson. I'm a Professor of Conservation Science at the University of Queensland. And today I'm going to be talking about conservation planning and how it relates to essential life support areas that has been brilliantly led by the United Nations Development Programme team and other great organisations around the world. So what are conservation decisions? Well, I think we've got to put it in the context of the real world. We make decisions every day. We make decisions, you know, when we go outside. Do we take our umbrella? We make decisions on a Friday night. Do we go to this party or that party? These are decisions that are real life, and we always are going through those decisions, and we shouldn't be scared of them. And in conservation, over the last 50 to 100 years, we've often walked away from going through these difficult decisions about really translating them into a process that actually makes sense. And we should do it more transparently and more honestly. And they simply equate to these questions: why, what, where, when, how, and who. If you start breaking it down into that, you can start actually working through a very simplistic but very transparent process to get to an outcome that works for biodiversity, for ecosystem services, and for the people involved at the landscapes and seascapes where conservation happens. Basically, conservation planning and conservation decision making is about how should we decide on conservation priorities. I think we all know horror stories in the past that we've actually focused on special animals or places that are really suitable for some parts of biodiversity or some parts of value to humanity that has discounted other places. We really spent a lot of time focusing on some things, but that has meant that other things have missed out. In my country of Australia, we've spent a lot of time protecting some very charismatic species such as the koala, but many, many other endangered species have simply missed out on any kind of conservation attention as a consequence. And I'm sure in the nation that you sit in right now, these problems arise as well. Now, what conservation planning does is actually put all biodiversity on the table and all ecosystem services on the table in a transparent way. So you can work through all levels of biodiversity, ecosystem processes, the costs and threatening processes that happen, their condition, and work out what is the priority for that nation or for the people in the landscape, or even, you know, globally, to think through what comes first and what comes second when you think about conservation. Now, fundamentally, until recently, what has limited conservation planning is good data. We've really struggled to get good data on where biodiversity and other ecosystem services have been located and what threatens these elements of biodiversity and ecosystem services. It's been a really big gap, and it's been highlighted by many studies around the world. And if you haven't got good data, you can't have good plans, regardless of the principles adopted. But the beautiful thing recently is there's been this fantastic data revolution over the last 5 years. The big data revolution that everyone's getting so excited about is actually real, and it's actually changing the way we think about conservation. So to make good conservation decisions, we need good spatial data, and that good spatial data is becoming increasingly available. So the excuse that we don't have the data at our fingertips is actually not actually really valid much anymore. So with good principles and good data, we can actually identify the locations and the intensities of actions that we need to do to overcome the threats to save biodiversity and ecosystems. Now, at a fundamental level, there are really only 4 principles you need to follow to get a good conservation plan going. You need to make sure it's connected, adequate, representative, and efficient. That's called the CARE principles, C-A-R-E. So if you get these 4 principles right, you will get a good plan every time. And it means basically, if you get these 4 principles right, the whole is always more than the sum of its parts. Connected is very simple. It means that from a species or an ecosystem or a process perspective, things can actually be connected and populations can support each other. So if it's not connected, these processes are broken, the system will fall apart. From an adequate point of view, you must make sure you've got enough of anything that you value to ensure that it can persist in the future. If you don't have enough of it, it won't persist. Representative means that you make sure you get everything you want in the system. It's like a recipe book. You can have a perfect cake, but if you don't get all the right ingredients in that cake, it's always going to taste bad. So you've got to have a representative system. You've got to make sure that all the pieces of the cake are actually there, the ingredients, so you can cook it at the right temperature and get the cake to the quality that you want. So you need a representative system and all those ingredients that you want in that conservation system to be there. So you want species, habitat, and ecosystem processes. And efficient, well, you need to make sure you get it at a minimal cost. My personal opinion is we often over worry about budgets. I think conservation, we really try and we should always ask for more. We always actually try and scrape by for too little. But the bottom line is, like with all walks in life, the less it costs, the better, the more chance of success. So an efficient system is always a better system. So they're the car principles that we should always follow when we're thinking about planning. And as you do your workshops and as you do your planning in everyday life, if you follow the care principles in conservation, you're always going to succeed, I think. So that's the basic lecture that I wanted to give, and I wanted to say thank you for your listening, and it's been really rewarding thinking through this. My email address is james.watson@uq.edu.au. Happy to take questions at any time, and I look forward to hearing how you go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks to James Watson for recording this video and send it to us. Again, James is in Australia, so he's not with us today, but if you do have questions, drop them in the chat and we'll share them with him. Moving on, and now that we have the basic of SCP in mind, we are thrilled to welcome the lead scientist of the project, Dr. Oscar Venter. Oscar is also on the west coast of the US, actually of Canada, so he recorded a little video for us to set up the context and make the link between SCP and South Africa. Leah, if you can play this video as well.
Hello, everyone. I hope the session's going so well so far. Also, I apologize I'm not able to attend this session in person, and I'm instead recording my presentation. I really look forward to later this week when I'll be able to join in a real-time session with you all. So you've just heard from Professor James Watson about the applications of systematic conservation planning to biodiversity conservation. In my presentation, I'm going to talk about the science of systematic conservation planning for the essential life support area process. And it does build directly off what James was just presenting, but there are some important differences as we use systematic conservation planning for ALSA. So what we're doing is trying to solve a problem, and that problem is our basic mission statement, which is on this slide in front of you. We've set out to identify the essential life support areas in South Africa, which if protected, avoided, mitigated, rehabilitated, and urban adapted will support nature-based commitments to biodiversity, climate change, and human well-being. Now that sentence is quite a mouthful. That is our mission statement. I wanted to read it in its full because it really highlights some of the unique aspects of ALSA for South Africa. Really the diversity and the uniqueness of the nature-based actions, protecting, avoiding loss of strategic areas, mitigating loss in other areas, rehabilitating degraded areas, and working in urban landscapes for climate adaptation are all unique nature-based actions that have developed and emerged and developed through the ALSA process and represent a very unique application of ALSA. So one of the major differences between a project guided by that mission statement versus traditional systematic conservation planning is that we are looking at multiple nature-based actions. We're not only looking at protected areas, but we're looking across the broader landscape to think about the other actions that can be taken to conserve, improve natural environments. So there's 5 such actions for South Africa, which we're going to discuss in detail a little bit later in my presentation. I just wanted to highlight that being one of the key differences in how we're applying systematic conservation planning. It's not in a binary way, it's in a way that considers the broader landscape, and in this case, 5 key nature-based actions. We're also using a fundamentally different approach to optimization. South Africa really is the global leader in applying systematic conservation planning for biodiversity and protected area planning. Most applications of SCP in South Africa have used the minimum set approach, what we call the minimum set approach, and that's quite typical in other countries as well. This approach sets specific conservation targets for each species or planning feature, such as maybe representing 70% of key species ranges or at least 20% of ecosystems. With ELSA, we use a different approach, one that we call the maximum coverage approach, which operates in a different way. There's three key components. The first component is that we are seeking to meet area-based targets for those nature-based actions. So we're seeking to meet a specific area-based target for protected area expansion or for rehabilitation, as well as the other actions. The second unique component is that we only consider areas where actions are feasible. We call these the hard constraints on the actions. So these are places where it could be feasible to establish new protected areas, or it could be feasible to undertake rehabilitation. And the final component is that the optimization works to select areas that maximize the benefits for biodiversity, climate change, and human well-being. These are what we call our planning features. So instead of trying to meet set targets for those planning features, we're trying to maximize their coverage or inclusion within the ELSA areas as those areas seek to meet the area-based targets. So put simply, essential life support areas, at the end of this process, we hope that they will be the places in South Africa that will deliver the greatest benefits when achieving national commitments to nature. So this process really starts and is underpinned by an initial work that was undertaken that many of you would have participated in, which is the policy review and hackathon, as well as in a series of expert working groups that took place over the last several months. This policy review, data collection, and expert working groups were trying to answer three key questions for us to structure the ELSA problem for South Africa. The first question was simply, well, what are the nature-based actions to protect, manage, and restore in South Africa? And you can see that, you'll see that for South Africa, those actions actually developed quite a lot, and they're quite unique for South Africa. Now, where are these actions feasible? So these are the hard constraints. And what benefits do those actions confer for biodiversity, climate change, and human well-being? You can see the first question that needed to be answered through this work was really focused on the nature-based actions. The second question was, what are the area-based targets for each action? Basically, what percentage of South Africa should be covered by each one of these actions? And again, this comes directly from policy commitments so that the ELSA process can support those area-based targets. The final question is, well, what are the priority nature-based solutions? These are from those nature-based actions. What is the desired outcome? What is trying to be achieved? And this is guided by a process that identifies all nature-based policy targets for South Africa, and a participatory process to identify the 10 priority policy targets. And we'll go through those in detail later. And then part of that process is identifying spatial proxies, a number of spatial proxies which can serve to represent those policy targets. Those are, again, what we call planning features. All right, so what I've presented so far is just a general approach and how we've proceeded through the process. Now what I'll be presenting is the specifics of the answers to those three questions surrounding the nature-based actions. What are the actions? What's the area-based target? And where are they feasible? So the first action for South Africa is to protect natural ecosystems. So the definition for protection in this case is areas where land use restrictions, as well as a management authority and a management plan, focused on maintaining or improving the state of biodiversity and ecological functions must be in place, resulting in preventing the loss of nature and the benefits people derive from it. So these could be strict protected areas, or they could be other forms that meet the forms of land management that meet this definition. This is the first action. The next question is, well, how much of this action is being targeted in South Africa? So for this, from the medium-term strategic framework document, there's a specific commitment that by 2023, 2024, 15.7% of South Africa is under conservation. So currently, the area, the protected area in South Africa, by the spatial data that we're using and the definition that we're using, 9.8%, almost 10% of the country is protected. So in terms of identifying new essential life support areas for protection, this needs to be expanded by almost 6%. So that's our area-based target for protection, first action. The next question is, where is potentially suitable for, or is protection potentially feasible? And for this, it was simply defined as all natural areas and bare ground in South Africa. So targeting areas which are still in good natural condition or are bare ground. So the next action is to rehabilitate degraded ecosystems. This action is defined as areas where the loss of nature, so this could be damage to an ecosystem, must be reversed, where ecosystems must be rehabilitated, at least to the degree to which they function sufficiently well to deliver ecosystem services. So the key here is we're not talking about full restoration of an entirely intact natural native ecosystem, but rather rehabilitating such that it functions sufficiently well. So when we're talking about rehabilitation, this is the definition that we're using. The next question is, well, how much of South Africa is being targeted for rehabilitation? So this policy commitment comes from the land degradation neutrality targets. And it's the sum of all biome-specific targets. All of South Africa's individual biomes have targets for rehabilitation. Sum those all together, they total just over 9 million hectares, or 7.4% of the country. So that is our area-based target for rehabilitation. Again, like all of these, you can see this target is coming directly from existing national policy commitments. Next question is, well, where is it feasible for this action? So for this, you can see the areas in the map in front of you. The areas in yellow are potentially feasible for rehabilitation. They are areas which are in erosion areas, erosion gullies, secondary natural areas, fallow land, cropland, plantation, and mine areas. So all of these land covers which are potentially suitable for rehabilitation into a more natural state. So the third nature-based action is mitigation. So this is areas where the cumulative historic loss of nature must be mitigated. areas where natural resources must be managed for sustainability and in remedy of unsustainable practices and or degradation. So mitigation in this case is basically preventing the full loss of a system, though that system might be used in some way sustainably. So the next question is, well, how much? What is the target? So from the National Biodiversity Economy Strategy, there's a specific target that 2 million hectares of private-owned, communal, and reform land be improved and developed for conservation and commercial game ranching. That equates to about 1.6% of the country, and that serves our area-based target for mitigation. The question of where can mitigation occur, this is within all fallow areas, cropland, and plantation areas. The next strategy is what we're calling urban adapt or urban adaptation. This is urban areas where adaptive actions can take place to reduce the climate change disasters on human settlements. So this is basically taking actions such as urban greening or buffering riparian areas that can help mitigate climate disasters within urban environments. And the target for this action is approximately 3% of South Africa. Okay, thank you very much. We do actually have one more action that's not within my slide deck, and that is avoiding the loss of ecosystems. So this is the action of avoid. Now this is not part of the optimization. The ALSA areas won't be optimized to place a void within South Africa, though it is a fifth action that will apply to all CBA areas in South Africa that are not identified as an essential life support area. So these will be strategic, these are already identified as strategic areas for conservation. And these areas will be identified in addition to the other ALSA areas for avoiding further degradation. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And I wish I could be there in person to answer any questions, but I know you're in good hands with both Jen and Dee. That'll be more than happy to address any questions you might have. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the session.
Great, thank you, Oscar. He's sending his regards from very rainy British Columbia, as we can tell. I see there are some questions starting to pop in the chat, and so I see your question, Roland, and Jen, thank you for answering this one. Jen does have one last presentation to build on what Oscar just said, so Jen, maybe I can turn over to you. And in the meantime, I'm encouraging our colleagues to drop their questions in the chat. We'll have a bit of time to take questions after Jen's presentation. I am mindful that we are over time and want to be respectful of your time. So Jen, if you want to take the floor, please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Marian. Maybe you or Leah can just confirm that this presentation will be available to folks via our consultation website.
Absolutely.
You can click on, great. You can click on one of the links and take a closer look at it, because I will go through things quite quickly. This is about the data that we use to represent our top 10 policies that will be benefiting nature and people. Next slide. So the purpose of this is to help you make the link between the data layers that have gone into the ELSA tool, many of you will be intimately familiar with, and then, as I highlighted before, some of which are completely new data derivations or composites. And then tomorrow, Dee and Jeff will be going through the layers that you're going to weight. So there was the data that came in and that has been pre-processed into the layers that go into the ELSA tool, and you will be weighting those, and they might not look like what the original input data looked like. So the purpose of my presentation is to help draw that link. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Again, it's available for anyone to reference and go through on their own a bit more slowly or in depth. And as always, we are available for any questions. So you can go ahead to next. So for our water ecosystems and ecological infrastructure, we use the National Biodiversity Assessment Rivers Layer and Wetlands Layer. And we simply took the wetland condition or the present ecological state data to differentiate between those that are a priority for maintaining and those that are a priority for rehabilitating. So keeping in mind that for all of these, there's sort of a feature or a benefit that we're trying to maximize, as well as an action that is prioritized for those areas. Next. Then for our strategic water source areas, we use the latest fine scale version from 2021 and the groundwater strategic water source areas from the CSIR work in 2017. Then for water ecological infrastructure that needs to be rehabilitated, we also brought in subcatchments from the freshwater ecosystem priority area work that was done a number of years ago. And we highlighted those that over the past decade have deteriorated. So they may have been identified for being in an AB condition when they were originally highlighted as priorities, but according to the latest present ecological state information, they're in a lower condition. So they're deteriorating and we prioritized those. Next. For climate change vulnerability, which was one of the policy commitments, we felt that vulnerability should not necessarily drive the protection agenda, that we should focus on management, so minimizing the multiplier effect of climate change, focusing on resilience and representation. Representation is largely addressed through our protected area expansion features, and resilience we represented through the velocity of climate change data coming out of the SPARC project, which looks at ecosystem stability under various climate scenarios. Next. The second part of that policy commitment is about monitoring and controlling invasive alien plants. For this, we use the quaternary synthesis prioritization done in 2012 and the National Invasive Alien Plant Survey data. There have been other permutations of these basic data sets, but those permutations bring in other criterion, such as follow-up or invest where we've previously invested, and we thought best to stick with the original data set that represented the actual infestations. Next. Protected area expansion, there's multiple components to this. I'll go through them very quickly. They were combined into one composite layer. We used our critical biodiversity area maps, which are all done at a provincial or a metro scale through systematic conservation planning that is focused on representation and persistence. So this is sort of systematic conservation planning within systematic conservation planning, and we gave those a weight of 40%. Next. We also brought in the brand new key biodiversity areas that have been drafted and are being put forward to the IUCN. Next. The next two components are about making sure that our protected area network focuses on underprotected ecosystems. That's from the NBA data. And next, underprotected species. So this is a novel data set. We brought together the various distribution maps that have been produced for the environmental screening tool and for other projects within SANBI. And we took the updated species protection level information from the NBA and combined them into these maps that show the richness where our most underprotected plant and animal habitats are in the country. Next. Again, climate resilience, I already showed that we used the velocity of climate change map from the SPARC project. Next. Just to highlight that this is a bit different from our protected area expansion strategy, which collated priorities from the provinces. And here you have a situation where a province might put forward a small basket of their critical biodiversity areas, and another province may put forward all of the critical biodiversity areas. Whereas the ELSA heat map for protected area expansion is entirely variable. We can look at a target of 15% or 20% or 30% of the country. Next. So that's a nice new lens for looking at protected area expansion. For land degradation neutrality, our proxy was simply using the latest national land cover and combining it with SANBI's habitat modification information, which largely comes from the mapping of secondary natural areas. And then we brought in the ARC gully data to combine the land classes into groups that are proxies for degradation. Next. For carbon stocks, we combined the two recommended layers by the expert group. That's DFFE's total soil organic carbon data set. It's based on an ISRC data set with the impact of land use brought in through the national land cover, and Fenter et al.'s predicted soil organic carbon stocks. So what we did was we combined the two, but where they were in agreement, they received an additional weighting. And the idea is that this is about having a higher level of confidence that acting in that area would indeed be a priority for carbon stocks in natural ecosystems. And next. Wrapping up. Disaster risk reduction, we used the CSIR's Green Book planning data. You can see that we brought in their drought risk information, wildfire risk, flood risk, and coastal risk, and combined those in urban and built up areas. Next. The final feature or benefit that we mapped was wildlife sector jobs. There was the first ever existing wildlife ranch coverage for South Africa, shown in pink. And then we looked at expansion of wildlife ranching, and that was modeled based on a variety of layers. What you're seeing here is the grazing capacity and the biodiversity economy nodes, as well as the existing ranches. Go next. Then the new pieces that we brought into this were a big game ecotourism model using a choice modeling approach, and distribution and habitat suitability models for wild dog, cheetah, elephant, rhino, and herbivores. And then we used the nature-based ecotourism information from DFFE's ecosystem-based adaptation priority mapping. Next, when those are all combined, you get a composite, and this is what you'll see tomorrow, is the composite of that big game ecotourism, other natural-based ecotourism, accessibility, grazing, land capability, and biodiversity economy nodes. I think the last two slides are just reiterating some of the information that Oscar shared about our action and zone mapping. So just reiterating that the macro scale actions or objectives that we're looking at are about protecting and avoiding, mitigating, and here mitigate speaks to sustainable land management. So opportunities to improve and maintain the long-term productivity or the productive potential and environmental function of areas, versus rehabilitate doesn't imply that you would focus on production in those areas, but rather returning to a natural or a near natural state. And then our urban category. Next, last slide. So effectively, this moves us from those of you that may be familiar with our 3-way action plan in South Africa to a 5-way action plan. So an action plan that looks at actions around adaptation in urban areas and where the priorities may be for that, and where we would look to identify priorities for mitigation and sustainable land management. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and as before, it's available for anyone to reference. Back to you, Marian.
Thanks a lot, Jen. That was a really clear yet concise presentation, so thank you for that. I did drop a link to your PDF, Jen, in the chat in case our participants would like to review this today or tomorrow before the other session. I think it's pretty important regarding the data sets. I know we're way over time, and for those of you who can still stay here, and yeah, I would like to make sure that we have just a few minutes to take question and answer. I don't want to rush that, it's important. And I do see Roland has dropped a question for Jen, saying that he's not sure that there is a separate target for protected area. The MTSF target is for conservation area. And I don't think, Jen, you had dropped a response for this one yet. So if you want to respond to this one. And in the meantime, if other participants have other questions, feel free to either raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Jen, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll respond quickly. So we looked into this. The MTSF target, the information that we could find is that the actual source of that is the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy. And if you look at the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy, the 15.7% comes through in one of the summary tables with asterisks and footnotes about that actually being a range depending on the ecosystem type. And so we were interpreting it from the perspective of the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy, even though in the MTSF it is written as the conservation estate more broadly. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And I think Roland was saying that he's going to provide further information on that. So thanks, Roland. We have a question from Chanel. Thank you, Jen. Two questions, actually. As each informant is updated over time, how will it fit into ELSA and by whom? And the second question is, will the individual informants be kept as standalone product, or could at least some of them be absorbed into ELSA?
I am not sure about the first half of that question. That will unfold. So this is a tool that's been introduced to our country, and we still have discussions that will be forthcoming about how we use that tool and what access we're able to have. So how much of the sort of background processing we will be able to work with ourselves versus the traditional sliders and interface that all the countries have. So that there's some variability there, I think, in terms of the level of access that we have, but anyone on the UNDP team can correct me if I'm wrong. So that's still to be determined. As far as the second half of your question, absolutely. There are both the standalone products in the composite layers that have been produced, as well as how they all come together into ELSA, as we'll see in the next 2 days.
Yes, thanks, Jen. And I can add for the first question, Chanel, that you have, it really depends. So in most of the countries, we do hand over the tool, the ELSA web tool, as well as creating this private project on UN Biodiversity Lab. So we will have an administrator for the UN Biodiversity Lab private project that can authorize more people to, get access to the private project as well as the data there. I'm sorry for the the background noise. So this is also going to be decided among, I guess, colleagues in South Africa on who should have access to this, and that we can discuss a little bit more later. I am reading in the meantime Roland's fuller answer, and Shannon with pleasure. Conservation areas include protected area, biosphere reserves, World Heritage sites. The MTSF targets. The MTSF targets are the baseline and projected for 5 years periods are based on conservation areas. So I don't know if that's something that we might want to discuss a little bit further offline because it seems pretty specific. Jenna, I'll turn back over to you for this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with Roland on this, and I apologize that he wasn't involved in the expert group that looked at this. But we felt that including, for example, biosphere reserves, which are quite land hungry. I know in the Western Cape, they cover a third to half of the province. They cover entire district municipalities, that we would look just at protected areas as per the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy and not include the full suite of conservation areas. For example, not targeting land for expansion in terms of biosphere reserves and other conservation area types, but that the protection zone would just look at protection as an action as defined in in more formal protected areas, not conservation areas.
Great, thank you. And I think I can also echo Mandy's kind comment on congratulating you, Jen, for the amazing work, as well as for colleagues, and especially on the new spatial data layers that you developed. That looks really exciting, and I look forward to diving more into this in the next few days, especially tomorrow. As of now, teamwork makes the dream work, indeed. As of now, I do not see more questions or hand raised, and I know we're getting at the hour and everyone might have another meeting or just looking forward to finishing the day. So we might wrap up today with this, and yeah, maybe you can just put up the slides so we all see what's coming tomorrow. We will continue working with you tomorrow, and we'll meet you exactly at the same time of today. We'll start at 2 p.m. your time to start the joint creation and review of the essential life support areas mapped in South Africa. So tomorrow we'll have a very participatory exercise led by our colleagues at SANBI. And I really hope I can see you there tomorrow as well. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today and for staying online a little bit more. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Annie or to Jen or to Leah directly or to me. We will be happy to take those and look forward to continuing with you tomorrow. Thank you so much for your participation. Have a wonderful rest of your day in South Africa. A good day for those of us who are in the East Coast of the US, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.